Hi, everyone. This is Shoshana Zatz from the California Institute for Behavioral Health Solutions. Welcome to the 2019 season of the Small County Fiscal TA webinar series. Mike is about to get started. I just wanted to do a few housekeeping things. Just to let you know, we're recording this session and you will be able to access it probably next week from our website. If you have any questions as we're going through, Mike will be stopping periodically for questions. Please write your questions in the question box. And the next one of this series will be March 29th. So I'm going to give it over to Mike now.
Great. Thank you, Shoshana. Good morning. What we're going to cover today is basically a revenue update based on the revenues that were presented in the fiscal year 1920 governor's budget that was released earlier this month. And hopefully this information will be useful for you as I know many of you are in the process of preparing your budgets for next fiscal year. Just kind of overarching comments on the budget. The governor's budget is based on continued strong economic growth in California. And so I kind of look at a lot of the revenue estimates, and I'll talk about specific ones as we go through it. But a lot of these revenue estimates, I would say, are kind of potentially on the high side, or maybe the maximum that I would consider budgeting, because we are starting to see signs that the economy is slowing. It's still growing, but it might not be as robust as reflected with the governor's estimated revenues. And so I'm going to go through each of the major revenue sources and kind of give you an idea of what those revenues are looking like, as well as some recommendations on what you want to consider as you develop your budgets for next year. So starting with 1991 realignment, again, this revenue source is three different funding streams. It's part of the sales tax, half-cent of sales tax. It's partly state vehicle license fees, and then it's a fixed amount of state vehicle license fee collections, which are the fines and penalties paid by people who don't pay their license fees on time. Most counties are required to provide a maintenance of effort to participate in 1991 realignment. You guys being small counties, some of you don't have an MOE. I think there's like 5 or 6 small counties that don't have maintenance of effort. But if you do have a maintenance of effort, it's probably pretty minor because statewide it's only 48 million. So we go along with 1991 realignment up until 2011 when the state swapped the CalWORKS maintenance of effort that was previously state general funded with the mental health 1991 realignment, and that began in fiscal year 11-12. So in other words, they took our 1991 realignment funded by those different sources, basically sales tax and vehicle license fees, not the vehicle license fee collections, and they used that to fund their maintenance of effort. And to be able to not blow up the entire 1991 realignment program, they went ahead and provided us a guaranteed minimum funding amount from the 2011 account beginning in 12-13 at basically $1.12 billion. That is a guaranteed minimum amount. Then once, and so that happened beginning in 12-13. And actually the shift happened in 11-12. We didn't quite get a guaranteed amount until 12-13. And then as part of the swap, once the amount that's collected by our revenue streams meets that guaranteed amount, anything over and above that comes to 1991 mental health realignment, and that began occurring, I believe, in 13-14. So we get some growth, or we get some funding in what's called the mental health account and mental health sales tax account and the vehicle license fee account now. And then in addition for allowing this to be done to you, you also get 5% of the annual growth in the 2011 Realignment Support Services account. That does not impact base, but it's just, you get it every year, but it's just a one-time kind of thing that just gets recalibrated every year. In terms of how monies are distributed, they're distributed on a monthly basis, and you receive, you continue to receive monies until the amount that is equal to what you received in the prior year is met, which is called your base amount. And you get separate distributions for, like I said, the four different categories of funding. You get that fixed guaranteed amount, which is the majority of the funding, which is called the mental health. You get mental health sales tax base, which is the growth above that 1.12 billion. Same with the VLF base. It's the growth that exceeded the amount of the guaranteed amount. And then you get the mental health VLF collections, and that's a guaranteed 14 million. And once again, the revenues and the sales tax base and the VLF base, once those are met, anything over and above those amounts are then placed into growth accounts. And there's a separate growth account for sales tax and a separate growth account for vehicle license fees. So we're going along fine with that for a couple of years until the state decided, or the Department of Finance decided to discontinue the coordinated care initiative due to it not being cost effective. And what that did is take a lot of the cost in the in-home supportive services program, shift those back to the counties, and increase the costs to the counties, where it was estimated, I believe, that in 17-18 it was going to be about 600 million in additional cost to the counties. And so to address this shortfall in funding, the state dedicated some state general fund monies to cover the shortfall in 17-18. It was about 400 million, and then also redirect a bunch of the growth funds, all the VLF growth funds, redirected some of the 16-17 sales tax growth funds, and then in both 17-18 and in 18-19, basically took all the growth from sales tax and used it to cover this increased expenditure. Now, the one thing is that the two city programs which receive VLF growth were not impacted by the redirection. And also your mental health sales tax base and your vehicle license base were not impacted either. It just had to do with you weren't receiving any growth because it was all being redirected for the increased costs to the social services programs. Now, the one thing that the governors, and this is very positive, that came out in the proposed 1920 budget, is that it's basically eliminating the redirection of growth funds beginning with the fiscal year 1920 growth. And I mean, there's a whole host of reasons or what the governor is proposing to do in terms of resetting the county IHSS base using historical state to county cost ratios. They're rebasing the IHSS maintenance of effort and only applying it to IHSS service costs, using state general fund for IHSS administrative costs. They're returning to the original methodology for calculating the caseload, the IHSS caseload cost, and not the accelerated approach, which has been used the last couple of years, which has been why there's been no growth available. They also are eliminating growth allocations to the CMSP board until their reserves fall below 3 months. Right now, it's quite high. And then they're also reducing the costs in the IHSS program by restoring a 7% across the board reduction in authorized IHSS hours. Kind of the bottom line in this is that the state's doing a bunch of these tweaks, and as a result, there's a fairly significant increase in state general fund that's going to be used to cover these IHSS costs. The estimate is about 242 million in additional state general fund monies in 1920, and I say additional. That's in addition to the 200 million in mitigation that they were going to provide. There's another 369.4 million anticipated in 2021, and again, that's in addition to the 150 million in state general fund mitigation, to where it kind of taps out, or they're at least in terms of their projections, where they got to the maximum amount. It's about 700 million in state general fund monies in 22-23 it's going to be used to cover the increase in IHSS costs. So kind of, again, the bottom line is, rather than redirecting, all this, the sales tax, well, it wasn't even redirecting sales tax growth. It was utilizing the sales tax growth to cover the increase in caseload costs and redirecting the VLF. Rather than doing that, they're going to use state general fund monies. To be honest with you, why this wasn't thought of initially, especially given how robust revenues have been, is somewhat strange. But it's good for you folks. And as you'll see on the next page, it means that you'll start to see potentially some growth in fiscal year 1920. The other thing that they're proposing is actually fixing the general growth allocation percentages and basically fixing or setting mental health at 37.4333%, which is basically the historical ratio that you received prior to all of this redirection and everything else that was done through the discontinuance of the coordinated care initiative. So then when we look at the projected revenues, again, you can see you got the CalWorks MOE swap, which is just a fixed guaranteed amount, the mental health sales tax base, which is because there were revenues received from sales tax over and above this CalWorks MOE swap. And you can see that's kind of been fixed at 34 million because there hasn't been any growth that's been available for mental health over the last 3 years. And then we have the vehicle license fee base. Again, not much growth. The growth that you see here is allocated to the two city programs, Berkeley and Tri-Cities, and the rest of the VLF growth was allocated or used for the social services costs. And so then, like I said, in the governor's proposed budget has some growth or is showing growth available to mental health in fiscal year 1920 for both sales tax and vehicle license fees. And so a couple of things on this. One is the fiscal year on a cash basis for the revenues from this account is basically September through August. So that's basically when you receive the revenues for 1991 realignment. The mental health sales tax base and the vehicle license fee base are not paid out until the CalWorks MOE swap is met, which means basically you're getting those at the very end of the year, and typically that is in August. And because of that, if we ever have a decrease in sales tax or vehicle license fees, these two base amounts will decrease significantly. So it would basically take about an 11% decline in the combined revenue to wipe out those two base figures, just as a heads up. But then we look, we're going to supposedly get this growth or anticipated growth. The one thing I would caution you, so a couple things. This 1920 growth will not be known until, and it won't be received at least until October 2020. So you'll already be in 2021 or fiscal year 2021 before the amount is known and before you receive the amount. So more than likely, you're not going to be budgeting it as part of your 1920 budget. The other thing is this 52 million here is predicated on a roughly 6% increase in sales tax in fiscal year 1920. And given what we're kind of again seeing the economy starting to slow, that seems a little excessive. Typically, we're seeing about a 3 to 4% increase in sales tax. So if sales tax only went up 4%, that 52 million would all of a sudden drop to about 25 million. So just be a little bit cautious on that 52 million dollars as being the growth figure. And so you'll hear it being discussed, but I personally I think it's a little overstated. The VLF is based on about a 3.6% increase in vehicle license fees, which seems more reasonable. But I think this might be a little bit high. And then again, we get this 5% of the support services account growth. So these numbers may be a little high, but it's fairly immaterial. But just be cautious again on these revenue estimates because again, the governor's budget is assuming fairly significant growth in revenues in the state. In terms of your actual allocations, those don't change from year to year. So the percent that you receive basically stays the same. So you're able to use this information, apply your percent to that to figure out roughly what your allocation would be. And so again, just kind of recommendations on how to budget this stuff. So for the current year, I wouldn't do, this is the same thing I think we said last year for the budget year, that you're basically keeping it flat. And so the 93.4 million per month. The other thing is that the managed care allocations and or the managed care offsets and state hospital offsets are actually reduced from your mental health allocation. So the net amount may vary, but your gross amount won't. And same thing. I doubt that we'd see a decline in sales tax this year. So I would anticipate that you're going to get the base funding for sales tax, and same with VLF. And then you've actually already received your funding for the VLF collection. And the other thing is, all this information is available. So if you want to look at it, this is on the State Controller's Office website under state and local government apportionments. If you go down to the monthly health and welfare realignment allocation, you can look at the amounts for the current year. And again, remember I said there's 4 different things. You got mental health is there. You've got the mental health sales tax base, VLF base, and vehicle license fee collection. If you want to see how much you received in 17-18, especially under the mental health, you go to year to date, and this is the amount you would have in your budget for current year as well as for budget year. It's literally just that amount on a gross basis. You can do the same thing with the sales tax base. What you received in August is probably what you're going to receive this coming August. And the same with the vehicle license fee base, which again you will probably receive in August, that amount there. And then, like I said, for the current year, the vehicle license fee collection has already been paid out. It was paid out in October and September for the full 14 million. I would anticipate the same thing in the next year. And that is what I would be looking at in terms of budgeting for both the current year and the budget year. And then in addition, you are, like I said, receiving this 5% of the support services growth account. It was 8.7 million in 17-18 that was distributed in October. Again, you can see that on the SCO's website, mental health subaccount growth, 17-18, and you can verify your amounts there. And that also tells you the proportion that you received. And so then when you go to budget year, basically keeping everything the same with the one difference that the 18-19 growth in the support services account is forecast to be 12.7 million. I would take the percentages that from the 17-18 growth distribution, apply it to the 12.7, and that may be what you want to go ahead and include in your 19-20 budget, because you won't receive these funds until at least October 2019. So that's 1991 realignment. Any questions?
No questions yet.
Okay. Then we go on to the 2011 realignment. Again, we had additional realignment occurred when the state couldn't meet their state general fund obligations with the revenues, so they realigned a bunch of services down to you folks. This was called the public safety realignment. And then they provided a dedicated funding stream, primarily the sales tax, for these services. The other thing, just never lose sight of, is that MHSA funds were used to fund the mental health services that were realigned in fiscal year 11-12, because the revenue from this wasn't sufficient to cover everything. And so you're supposed to, this is a little more restrictive than 1991 realignment. 1991 realignment's pretty broad in terms of what you can use the funds for, as long as it's related to mental health services and the services that were realigned in 1991. 2011 is more specific. It's primarily, well, I shouldn't say it's primarily, it encompasses all the substance use disorder services that were funded with state general fund monies up until 11-12. And then also in the Medi-Cal, especially mental health program, it says you can use these funds for anything in the Medi-Cal, especially mental health program, which includes early and periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment, as well as mental health managed care. And the reason those two are called out is because that's really what the state general fund allocation was prior to this realignment. You received state general fund monies for EPSDT, and you received a managed care allocation. The one thing, though, the realignment statute, the 2011 realignment statute, does not specify how much needs to be spent on each of these programs. So it is your discretion on how much you want to use for each of these programs. Some of the information notices have provided kind of the statistics that the state used to determine your allocation, but you're not required to spend that amount on each of these individual programs. It is up to your discretion. However, you are required to meet the obligations of the two entitlement programs that were realigned completely to you, which is the Drug Medi-Cal program and the Medi-Cal Especially Mental Health program. So you definitely need to fund all the obligations for those two programs. You also need to be cognizant of your maintenance of effort requirement related to the substance abuse block grant, as well as if you do reduce EPSDT funding by more than 10% in any given year, you're required to hold a public hearing. So you do have discretion, but keep in mind you've got to meet some of these obligations, which you're probably doing anyway with these funds. But I would not. It makes it a little bit more difficult when you receive the warrant or the check on how to split it between, for example, SUD versus mental health. But what you do not want to do is start creating a bunch of fund balances on one side, in one program, either in SUD or in mental health, while the other program is struggling for funding, because you don't need to do that. So the revenues that are shown in the governor's budget are reflected here. They're anticipating, a decent amount of growth in both 1819 and 1920. Again, the fiscal year from a cash flow perspective is you receive the cash in September through August for this revenue. And the growth, the growth has been distributed kind of sporadically, but it does seem like a methodology has been developed whereby you will start to see these funds more timely. In fact, the 17-18 growth was just distributed this month. So that would be nice if all of a sudden you're starting to receive the growth that was earned in the prior year. If you're receiving it, say, midway through the next fiscal year, it would be a significant improvement over where we were at one point, where the growth was lagging by over one fiscal year. The only other thing, so that it is projecting higher level of growth in this revenue than what we've seen over the last couple of years. So again, I would caution you. This could be. I think this is an upper end on both of these figures, and I would say we're somewhere between 100 million and 126 million in 1819, and somewhere between 100 million and 115 million in 1920. The other thing, you see this percent change, and the actual percent increase in sales tax that they're projecting is about a 5.5%, but we end up getting a larger share of the growth, which is why then it relative to our share of the base. And over time they'll catch up, but that's why this percentage, 9%, that's not the increase in sales tax. That's the increase in the actual projected base. But the reason it's so high is because we get a disproportionate share of the growth. So we get a higher share of the growth than we do of the base. But again, I would caution you on these numbers being a little bit high. So in terms of looking at how to budget for this, so the current year will be funded up to the 1819 base of the basically $1.4 billion. But where it gets a little complicated, I think, is going to be on your individual county allocation percentages. So currently, the 1819 percentages that have been used were basically those that were put in place in 1718, assuming a 1718 rolling base concept. And the rolling base concept is where you take the prior year base plus the prior year growth. In other words, 1617 base plus 1617 growth then equals your next year's base. And so that was what was used to determine the 1819 was basically up through 1718. But now that the 1718 growth has been distributed, I would anticipate as early as the distribution that's coming out next week that you're going to see some sort of adjustment to the individual county base allocation percentages to incorporate the 1718 growth. And the way that you can figure out how much I believe that you should receive for 1819 in its entirety would be to take the amount shown in your initial base for 1617 from DHCS Information Notice 16052, add the 1617 growth from Information Notice 18060, and the 1718 growth from the recently issued DMH information or DHCS Information Notice 1901, and that should be what your true base is going to be at the end of the year. How the state will adjust, they'll probably try to do some, I would imagine, some sort of true up, and then apply those percentages going forward. And a true up meaning truing up the year-to-date distributions. I don't know this for a fact, but I just would anticipate that in terms of what I would be looking at for the current year in terms of how much to receive in the current year. And then, as I said, the 17-18 growth you already received, and so hopefully, it was half based on actual approved claims and half based on proportion of different types of beneficiaries, basically adjusted for the cost of disabled and foster care, which predicates the need for funding for those type of beneficiaries. So again, you can go back to the State Controller's Office website. Here's the growth special account, and here's your individual amounts. And if you need to see the remittance advice, you can look at that, just to make sure that these funds are in fact getting credited to your account. And then so for budget year, I think I would probably just keep my budget flat, even though we're anticipating some growth in 18-19. And the reason for that is because we won't know either the amount of the 18-19 growth or the how it's going to be distributed until we're probably about a year from now. And so to go ahead and to budget the growth at a higher level, you're at risk for both the sales tax not coming in as high as the state is showing, as well as there could be some adjustments depending on what your county did with EPSDT and drug Medi-Cal relative to the other counties. So given those unknowns, at this point, I would be trying to hold it fairly constant going into next year, and then do a mid-year budget revision once you know how much the growth is. And you may even do two. You may do one in October once you know the dollar amount and keep your percentage the same, and then do another one in January once you know what your true percentage is going to be. And the nice thing about the 18-19 growth is that it does two things. One is you actually get the check, and so say that's January 2020 that you get the check, as well as it increases the base for the year. And so it's kind of a double bonus from that perspective. So that is 2011 realignment. Are there any questions there?
Now there are several questions. First, there is a question about the State Controller's Office links being in the PowerPoint. They aren't in the PowerPoint, but Mike, would you be willing to send out the links?
So they're at the very end of the presentation. They're at the very end of the presentation. There's one. Without skipping to, I give you some. This one right here. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah.
Okay,
so that'll get you. That will get you to this website, and then you've got the behavioral health services growth, behavioral health subaccount, the mental health subaccount growth, which is that 5%, the mental health services fund, which is the MHSA distributions, and then the monthly health and welfare realignment allocations. So hopefully that's
Great.
good enough for you. But anyway.
Yeah, that should be fine. Thank you. Second question, can you confirm that sales tax growth is not forecasted to go entirely to caseload in 1920, leaving some for health, mental health?
Yes. That is what is in the, let's see, that is what is in the governor's proposed budget. If you go to the state and local realignment, this is from the budget. This is it's probably the entire thing, but there's this page here which shows the estimated revenues and expenditures for state and local realignment, and you can see here that they're anticipating $52 million going to mental health from the general gross subaccount, which is sales tax. So that's what they're projecting. They're projecting 32 million in caseload growth. They're projecting total growth of 171 million. And then they're projecting that the 139 million, or about 140 million, will be distributed to the different programs, health, mental health, social services, I believe, health, mental health, child poverty, sorry, that would be available to distribute to the different programs. So that is what's in the governor's budget. Again, the one thing I would caution is that I think, you know, that's predicated on a 6% increase in sales tax, and you can look at that also by comparing. So here's the total revenues, you know, from 3.5 million up to 3.7 million. It's a fairly significant increase. I don't know if that'll actually occur. And the other unknown that's part of this is this 32 million in 32 million in caseload costs, because that could be higher or lower depending on what the actual costs are. But at this point, you know, that's what's in the budget. I would anticipate that you are going to see some growth from 1920, whether it's that full amount, both the 52 million and the 30 million or whatever from VLF. I think that might be a little high. But the other part is you're not going to get that money until we're into 2021, and it won't change your base until you're into 2021. So for current year and for budget year, I would completely ignore it and just kind of see where all of this goes. And like I said, they're kicking in a significantly higher amount of state general fund monies. If the economy turns sour at all, the state's not going to have that general fund money to kick in to cover this. Again, at this point, it's in the budget, so yes, it's confirmed, but I would caution on whether you're going to actually get anything until we get closer, you know, basically a year from now. Anything else?
All right. Can you repeat the public hearing information?
Yeah, there's a provision and actually we can get you the I could email Shoshana the paragraph, but it says I believe it says if you intend to decrease your EPSDT programs by 10% or more, you're required to have a public hearing. So, and I forget if it's spending or budget or if it's really generic. Basically, putting in place a provision, and I'm assuming by the providers, that would require counties to have public hearings if they're going to try to cut their EPSDT programs at all. But I can get you the specific provision, and we'll email that out to you.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Hold on a second. CSAC's budget bulletin says that state general fund mitigation for IHSS is eliminated beginning in 1920 in the governor's budget. Is that correct?
I thought yes, I believe it is. Is it 1920? Is the last year? No, I thought there was one more year, 2021. But still, with all those changes, it still is increasing the cost of the state general fund of IHSS. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line, whether it was through the mitigation or through the rebasing or resetting of all these different MOEs and based using different state county cost sharing ratios. It basically is the state general fund monies are coming in to cover the additional costs, up to where it's almost 700 million, forecast to be about 700 million in fiscal year 22-23. And so that it's kind of I guess it's a nuance between what's considered mitigation versus what is considered just now a new state general fund obligation. I kind of add them together and say, you're going to see about in 1920, you're going to see about 440 million of state general fund monies going into this program. It sounds like in 2021 they're forecasting about 520 million, and like I said, it ramps up to where it's about 700 million in 22, 23. And so whether you call it mitigation or whether you call it just an increased obligation, as a result of all these changes, it's still being funded with state general fund monies. And again, personally, I don't know why they didn't just do this out of the gate. They could have, and they wouldn't have had to redirect all this money because they had the revenue. But I guess this governor's more open to doing that than the prior. So anyway.
Okay, there's a few more questions. If we have to project the 1991 growth even for future years, how should we do this for our county?
So it's going to be predicated on whether there's growth in sales tax and vehicle license fees, and how much the growth in sales tax, in caseload costs are. I would. So the 34 million, just to give you an example, I think we got there. I think it took 2 years to get there. It was either 1 or 2 years of your current base, and then I think the VLF was the same thing. It was a couple of years worth of growth. It's again, it's a combination of a bunch of unknowns. What is going to go on in the economy in terms of sales tax revenue, and then secondly, what's going to happen with any sort of increased social service caseload costs, because that's what the first priority for sales tax growth is. And now it's a little bit more complex because, again, in fiscal year 22-23, the state's saying they're kicking in almost 700 million to cover the IHSS changes. And if there's a shortfall in state general fund revenues, this may be revisited. So, going out beyond that, using conservatively something, maybe 50 million in growth, which assumes, roughly a 3 to 4% increase in both revenue streams, sales tax and VLF, and a pretty minimal increase in caseload. I think if I was going to do it, that would be kind of the max I would use, because again, most economists are thinking that we already are seeing a slowdown, meaning it's not growing as fast. It hasn't gone quite the opposite, where we're seeing an actual decline in revenues, but at some point we will. The further out the riskier it is. So I don't know if that really helps, but I definitely wouldn't be budgeting any more or anticipating any more than, say, 50 million a year in growth. You can figure out your percent, because that isn't going to change. But I will also say that the LAO, issued their report on realignment, and they said that the distributions should more closely approximate the need. Similar to kind of the caseload costs on the social services side. So if the legislature takes that up, and you could easily see the percentage distributions change, and you'll have to start reporting actual expenditure of 91. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there's a lot of unknowns to try to go out. Because this basically gets you through 2021, because you can take take this growth here, add it to this base, and that becomes your base for 2021. And then, like I said, I don't know if I'd be looking at 84 million versus saying maybe this is more like 50 to 60 million total. And that's how much this base will go up for 2021. And then you start to question whether we're going to actually see continued growth in sales tax.
All right, two more questions.
All right.
You mentioned that the state uses percentages to distribute the behavioral health subaccount monies, but counties are not held to those percentages. However, the distribution percentages suggest that there are limited funds. How do you suggest counties budget to meet all the entitlement services for mental health and SUD?
So, those are kind of two different things. I say so the state does have a percentage that they use to distribute your funding, and they calculate it through all these little machinations where they take your base from 16-17, add the 16-17 growth, 17-18 growth to get to your what should be your 18-90 base allocation, and also your base allocation percentage. The what I'm saying is the percentage by these different programs. So first of all, the 16-17 base looked at these different programs to come up with a number. The growth in 16-17 and the growth in 17-18 is not factoring in a bunch of this stuff. It's looking at it is 50% based on your drug Medi-Cal claims and your EPSDT claims, but the other 50% is based on your beneficiaries. So, which is not specific to a given program. So, and in terms of how I would budget it, I'd look at where are my needs. And so if I'm, because really especially with you small counties who may have not been doing that much on the SUD side, where I've seen in some counties is that you start to accumulate, you set aside the percentages based on these info notices, and you start to accumulate fund balances on the SUD side while you're struggling to make ends meet on the mental health side. That doesn't make any sense. You need to be more flexible with this funding. And if you have needs on mental health and you're accumulating a fund balance on the SUD side, then move the money from SUD to mental health. And there's nothing that precludes you from doing that. I guess you could have it the opposite way now too, especially that you are starting to have to do more with the drug Medi-Cal program if you're going into the ODS waiver and starting to incur additional expenditures over and above what your allocation is, while at the same time maybe you haven't increased your Medi-Cal, especially mental health program very much. You theoretically could have the opposite, where based on those allocation percentages, you were putting too much aside for mental health. And so again, you'd shift that over to SUD. The downside is you generally don't know this until you really go through your cost reports and figure out how did I fund these services. So how would I budget for it? I probably would look again at where is the need for the funding. You have very limited resources on the SUD side, so fund my drug Medi-Cal program and all my SUD that is necessary, other than things that are eligible for the block grant, and then the balance all goes to mental health. I guess that's how I would look at doing it.
All right, one more question. Can 2011 realignment go to pay for only EPSDT mental health services or adults also?
So the specific statute says this right here. It can go for Medi-Cal specialty mental health services, which includes EPSDT and mental health managed care. So in other words, you can use it for anything related to the Medi-Cal specialty mental health program. And really, so because again, it took the place of two different state general fund payments that you received. One was for EPSDT services, but the other was for this mental health managed care allocation, which was the state general fund allocation given to you to be the Medi-Cal specialty mental health plan. And in becoming the Medi-Cal specialty mental health plan, you all of a sudden were subject to all these additional, utilization review requirements, mental health plan administrative requirements, etc. As well as you've probably expanded even services on the adult side where, so long story short, yes, you can use it on adults, you can use it on kids, you can use it on admin, you can use it on UR, but it needs to be related to the Medi-Cal, especially mental health program. You cannot use it on non-Medi-Cal services. I think that would be a stretch, although you could argue if you had someone in an IMD who's Medi-Cal and you couldn't place them in a Medi-Cal facility, you potentially could, but I wouldn't go there. I think in general, you're going to have enough need in your Medi-Cal, especially mental health program, for match, and you can use this for that purpose. It doesn't have to be EPSDT, nor do those sharing ratios that existed where you had a local match requirement for EPSDT, that went out the window with the 2011 legislation. You're now just obligated to ensure the provision of all Medi-Cal, especially mental health services, with your various funding streams. So, yes, you can use it for more than just kids.
All right. Why don't you continue?
All right. So MHSA, and we're going to run out of time here. So it's you got two sources of deposits. You got the monthly personal income tax payments, and then the annual adjustment, which is the settling up. Whatever's left over in the fund at the end of the month is what you receive. And then you kind of see here how it spikes in months following when an estimated tax payment is due. And then these annual adjustments, which are incredibly volatile. Fortunately, they're known on March 15th or even earlier, and those are deposited July 1st. So one thing there are actually two things I wanted to point out with this, is that in general, you can kind of track on a monthly basis the distributions, and they should kind of track to a prior year, with the exception of August, because August is thrown off by the annual adjustment. The other thing is that happened this January is this January's distribution was significantly lower than what it had been in prior years. I'm hoping it's due to the change in federal tax policy that put a limit on the amount you can write off on your federal taxes for a combination of state and local income tax with property tax. And so people who pay estimated taxes previously might have paid them before or in December. They didn't pay them in December, and they're going to pay them in January. So this is something you need to watch, because if we don't see a spike way up here in February, then we would expect to see a spike in May. If that doesn't occur, we're going to be short this year on MHSA revenues. So just as a heads up. Real quickly, these are the projections from the governor's budget. The cash transfers basically follow what occurs in personal income tax payments. Roughly, the projections out here are about a 3% a year increase. The annual adjustment, this amount is known. This is what happened back in July. And so that is known. These are the projections over the next couple of years. And reason this was lower, which again, I have no idea why, is for some reason the tax earned, or the amount earned by this tax was actually lower in 2016 than in 2015, which is why that's low. This is based on 2017, and this is based on 2018. The one thing I would caution on this is I don't know if it factors in the large decline we saw in the stock market in December, so it may be a little bit overstated. And the other thing I was going to point out is how to look at all this stuff. This is from the governor's budget. It's the fund condition statement for Department of Healthcare Services. So you can see I'm pulling these annual adjustment amounts from here. And so they show it as an accrual you'll actually get the cash 2 years later. And so they're projecting it to go up and then to go down, but it's still, The most that we've ever received is 580 million. So we're kind of maxing that out. And again, these numbers look a little high, but they may actually materialize. And so then taking that and putting it into component funding for you, again, this is an August to July on a cash basis on what you anticipate receiving. And the difference between the revenues and the actual distributions would be to factor in the 5% set aside for administration and then anything else that's being reserved. And beginning next fiscal year, we anticipate or previously anticipated monies being reserved for the debt service payments for the No Place Like Home bond issue. And so what we have here is 62 million is taken out of 1920 and 88 million out of 2021. Because as projects are ready to go, they'll sell blocks of bonds, and so it's not anticipated that the full $2 billion of bonds will happen right out of the gate. However, the governor's budget does call for expedited issuance of the bonds. If that occurred in 1920, where they issued, the full $2 billion, then this number would be reduced by roughly $70 million. And the same then would hold true for 2021, where that would be about $45 million less. But in terms of, where I would look at budgeting, we are going to see a decline in current year revenues in all likelihood because that annual adjustment was so low. Revenues are running a little bit higher up, at least until January, about 2%. In Information Notice 18038, the state actually gives you what they believe the amount that you're going to receive in the current year is. I'd probably stick with that at this point. I don't see any reason to change. And then the budget year, I'd anticipate a low of 5% to a high of 10% increase over the numbers that are shown here. Like I said, it has 62 million for No Place Like Home. Once we know the annual adjustment, then we'll, which is only a month and a half away, we'll probably make a revision to those anticipated distributions. And at this point, all you can do is use your individual 18-19 county allocation percentages into 1920. So that's MHSA. Any questions there? Shoshana, anything? Nope.
There are some questions, but I think because of the time, if you have more content, I can send you the questions and have you reply in writing.
Okay. Medi-Cal, especially mental health reimbursement, this hasn't changed. You guys incur CPEs. You get paid based on interim rates. And then you do your cost report, and the state's behind both settling and auditing cost reports. And I would suggest you look at this Information Notice 18026 if you're not familiar with it, that provides the expedited timeframes. Basically, the state's anticipating settling 6 cost reports this fiscal year between what they're supposed to start settling next week through the end of December. The state then has 3 years to audit. Just kind of give you an idea of what the revenues are. This and it's a pretty modest increase in FFP, just kind of based on general growth in services. But again, it's from a budgeting perspective, it's really based on your local situation and what you're incurring. The one thing, though, I do want to point out and make sure I believe you're aware of is the supplemental payment state plan amendment, where you're able to obtain additional reimbursement for costs incurred above what you were actually reimbursed. And the state previously provided forms for doing 8-9 and 9-10. My understanding is that they're now as of a week or two ago, have put out the forms and instructions for 1011 and 1112. And those, the actual total dollars aren't in the budget until they start, I guess, to get these forms back. So I would anticipate seeing that in the May revise. But the key for you folks is to make sure that you complete these forms and get them in, because I believe they're due February 1st. And then state general fund, there continues to be some state general fund monies that you can see here: continuing care reform, the performance outcome system, managed care regs implementation, the mental health parity regs. We have an increased state share. This is actually where the majority of this money is the increased state share for the ACA Medi-Cal clients. In 2018, the sharing ratio was 94% Fed, 6% state. Currently, in this fiscal year, it's 93% Fed, 7% state. And then in 2020, it goes permanently to 90% Fed and 10% state. So that's what you see there. There's additional utilization review costs, and these were to certify the foster family agencies and also to reimburse you for additional data collection related to the special terms and conditions of being a mental health plan. There was a one-time allocation this year that you should have seen for $50 million for the homeless mentally ill program. And then there's a repayment of the AB 3632 mandate. One thing I didn't put on here because it doesn't impact every county, but for those that are doing the whole person pilot program, there's an additional $100 million for supportive housing services in the budget year. That's kind of a one-time thing for the whole person care pilot programs. And so that's kind of the summary of what it looks like. So again, kind of a flat year this year. It's going to go up a little bit next year, but much of that growth you really won't see until 2021. So it looks good going forward. And again, hopefully we've given you enough information on the specific revenues to help you budget for each of those. So we're a little bit over. I don't know, Shoshana, do we want to take any questions or just do them all in writing?
Well, it's up to you. If you have the time, we can stay on.
Actually, and here's the information. So the state controller's office that I was on is here. If you want to look at the monthly finance bulletins, really what that talks about is it tells you where the MHSA is coming in. There's information on your mental health plan information there, and then hopefully you're all aware of the information DHCS information notices, which you can find there. I'd rather just address the questions.
Okay.
Let's go for it.
Let's do it. How is mental health managed care defined? In other words, what does managed care fund?
So, and that's it. So mental health managed care is you being the Medi-Cal Specialty Mental Health Plan. So it's everything that you do as the Medi-Cal Specialty Mental Health Plan. And so that's my point on the 2011. You can use it for anything related to being the Medi-Cal Specialty Mental Health Plan. You can use it for Medi-Cal admin. You can use it for Medi-Cal UR. You can use it for Medi-Cal services, whether it's kids or adults. And that's how it's defined. You're the Medi-Cal Specialty Mental Health Plan, which is a managed care plan.
All right. Can we use 1991 or 2011 realignment to pay admin costs for any of the homeless grants?
I don't know. I think 2011 would be a stretch because it's not Medi-Cal. At least I'm assuming it's not Medi-Cal. I would think you could use 91 realignment. But again, it needs to be for the thing with 91 is it's very it's pretty broad, but it still needs to be related to mental health. So to the extent that it's related to administering the homeless and your portion of it related to mentally ill, then yeah, I would think you could use it to cover. You could use 91, but again, I think 2011 would be a stretch.
Okay. How do you suggest small counties manage risk on the SUD side when 100% of realignment is required to be spent to meet MOE?
Um, yeah, I don't know how you guys mitigate the risk on the SUD side. Obviously, at some point, the more that you can pool resources among counties, because the dollars are so small to start with. Similar to what we used to do with the small county emergency risk pool, the SCRP, when we first went into managed care. I don't know if you guys want to look at doing something like that, or, but I think it would be it is very scary for you folks, because all it takes is, a couple of placements in one of the NTP programs, and all your realignment's gone. So I don't know how else to I don't know how to mitigate the risk other than to pool resources to create a larger client base that you're all sharing, and a dollar base that you're sharing. I don't know if you can buy risk reinsurance on the open market, but I would think pooling resources, especially among the super small counties, probably is the best way to go. Anyway.
All right. What is the additional 100 million in whole person care homeless money? Is that the same as HMIOT allocation received, or is it new money out for grabs?
I believe it's new money, but specific to the whole person pilot programs. Let's see, where did I? No. There's specific language for it in the budget. This is another actual good place to go if you ever want to get more detailed information on the budget. Is the Medi-Cal estimates page on DHCS's website. Let's see. I think it was in the regular policy change. No, that's where the undocumented was. Actually, I printed it out. Did I print it out? No, I didn't. It says it in. No, it is in here. It's one of the last policy changes. Here we go. So this one-time augmentation will provide supportive housing services for individuals who are homeless or at risk of being homeless, focus on mental illness. So I got the impression it will be made. So again, you're going to probably have to compete for it. But I think it's the folks that are probably in the pilot program right now. I could be wrong, but that was my understanding.
All right, that's the end of the questions.
Okay. All right, I apologize for going a little long. I guess that's good because we're finally seeing some growth on the 91 side. But we will have the next call. When did you say, Shoshana?
March 29th.
Yeah. And if there are any specific topics I think that you want covered, I think we've got a list of some, but we're always open to other suggestions. And
yeah,
go ahead and
please,
email Shoshana on
if
that.
you have, right.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Mike, and thanks for your attention, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.